He's such a wonderful guru that you should be lucky to have one like him. With these few words, I'll start my experience with all of you. By now, I know most of the participants have already put in nearly 2 decades and all over in practice. But still, I would like to share my experience. Not that I'm going to tell you anything which I don't know, uh, because in our profession, it's a ever learning process. Every day you learn. For example, now I am preparing a e-book on labor laws. All these 40 days I'm using my time. I was shocked to know that in spite of 40 years practice only in this branch of law, I've learned little and I have a lot to learn. It was really because I was impression, okay, I have a fair idea about this labor laws, but it was not so. That is why I want to share with you. The practice in next 10 topics will be on virtually on original site or practice in labor code, which is called a trial code. Next, in the issue related arguments will be same for trial court as well as high court, but a slight difference. But I would say to begin with, a lawyer is not fully prepared unless he starts his career as a trial lawyer. Because there is a great advantage in being a trial lawyer than becoming an appellate lawyer. And it cannot be the reverse. Once you become an appellate lawyer, you cannot be a trial lawyer and you will fumble. The advantage of trial lawyer becoming an appellate lawyer is to grasp the facts so quickly when you prepare a writ petition or a counter affidavit or when you argue the case. So any of the listeners who have not practiced in trial court, immediately switch out to trial court at least for 5 years, then come back to appellate court. The trial court is really fun, I should say. The beginning of the trial is, as you all know, the pleadings. Pleadings is the drafting of claim statement or counter statement or reply statement. This is the foundation of a litigation. Therefore, you have greatest responsibility towards your client when you either draft a claim statement or a doubt draft a counter statement. Because if you fail somewhere there, it will haunt you till the litigation is over. Even if you go to an appellate lawyer, he will say, why you have not pleaded these, why this pleading is not there, why you have not raised that point, etc. etc. You will look so small at that point of time. Therefore, drafting is the most, and you should get trained in that. Uh, Pleading is nothing but marshalling of all relevant facts. And once you put the pleadings, then you pick up the legal issues and put it in place. Therefore, you should have the facts and law already in place when you draft a claim statement or a counter statement. So once you run through the facts, then go back to journals, statutory provisions, and find out where is your stand. And at that time itself, you should have a case law with you fairly to begin with. In my experience, I have come across, apart from my guru, many other lawyers who had a deep impact on me. I don't know whether Ramesh is on the line. For drafting claim statement, his senior, his uncle, K.S. Janagiraman was the model, as far as I could see. I believe or I heard that the great MRN used to comment, oh, is it claim statement of K.S. Janagiraman? Let's read it. In fact, I still remember when I thought preparing notes, the claim statement prepared by K.S. Janagiraman in the case of Bima Industries, in which our office appeared. That claim statement was a model for me. How he factually brought out, it is a case of retrenchment, uh, brought out the facts, and he dealt with fact and law together in respect of 25 F, G, B, and H. That's how I learned what is this F, G, B, and H. So the claim statement should be a real foundation for the litigation start with. Now let's come to the counter statement. Without disrespect to any of other senior lawyers, my senior is the best in drafting counter statement. His two fundamental points are, as I learned, is your counter statement should be an interesting story first. It should interest the judge, or when the judge wants to dictate the award or he wants to listen to you, the counter statement should flow like a story. Who are you? What is that you are doing? What is the background? How this retrenchment or termination or lockout or layoff or closure, how it took place? It should flow like an interesting story. And secondly, you should deal with the claim statement paragraph point by point. I have come across claim statements or counter statement which straight away start with denial of paragraph of the claim statement. It is totally unacceptable because you will never get the case across to the judge. Even in denial, it is not that I deny the allegations made in claim statement para so and so. You should put forth your version in the claims counter statement as to how the contentions and allegations in the claim statement are incorrect and what is correct. So both you have to stay in the counter statement. So your counter statement should be a complete package. It is almost a written arguments if you take it, unless subsequently you add the evidence and case laws in the written arguments. So the claim statement should be a complete factual narrations, and counter statement should also be a interesting story. The claim statement should not be vague, nor the counter statement reply should be vague. Both should be very explicit and it should be at length. Unlike CPC, we are not bothered about the various provisions. So amendment or additional counter statement are all possible, but we should be always careful to draft the claim and counter statement, which is the foundation. It is ideal, but we seldom do, including me. The next point, third point, is called a documentation. Even while you prepare the claim statement or prepare the counter statement, I'm sure you must be having the documents with you. Or I can even say, don't draft a claim or counter based on the oral instructions of a client. It may be wrong. Therefore, prepare the claim or counter only with the documents and not without that. And secondly, the documentation, you please ensure it is your duty that the documents are all genuine. In fact, we can find out if the document is not genuine with our experience. You can say, don't show me this document, I'm sure this is not a genuine document. You can probe it because you don't get embarrassed when you come to the court with a fabricated document. In my experience, I have come across a case where the client, he always prides he is a very smart man. And he gave us a document, a cover, which the workman is supposed to have returned undelivered without opening, 3 covers. Since it was returned undelivered, my client was impression, the workman wouldn't have seen what is inside, but he was wrong. In one of the covers, actually the workman had opened it, seen it, taken a Xerox, and again put it and pasted it and sent it to him. There was a shortfall of notice pay in the retrenchment compensation. So my client realized it. Later on, he also did something and put the checks, etc. But when the matter came to the court, there were two documents. One document which says with retrenchment compensation, another document which says without retrenchment compensation. Obviously, without retrenchment compensation was the correct document. So we had to cut a really sorry figure. But how we overcame is by question of law, etc., etc. Therefore, preparation of documents is very relevant, and it should be prepared at the time of preparing the claim statement or counter statement. And the documents should really support your case in all respects. If it is a case of transfer, not only you merely put the transfer order, you should give reasons for the transfer, which is called as administrative reasons. What is the administrative reasons? Oral evidence is not sufficient. There should be sufficient documentary evidence. Was there an internal note? Or there is a discussion? Why Ravindran was picked up for transfer? Why not Harun? So that sort of a documentary evidence should be available to get a clear verdict in your favor. So third is documents. Fourth one, pleading, claim, counter, document. Fifth one is evidence. This is where experience or listening to the court proceedings carefully, following the court proceedings carefully helps a lot. As a trial or as an appellate lawyer, wherever it is, when you come to court, if you find a place to sit in the court, you always occupy it and sit till your case is taken up. That is my practice. Only when I find there is no seat in the court, I stand outside or sit outside. Because I learned this many years ago when I found Mr. M. R. Narayanasamy used to sit in the court, even if his case is after an hour or so. And he used to closely follow the court proceedings. Because when you come to court, which I deal with it in the end when the court craft, etc., you should be alive to the court and the judge and what's happening in it. The best way of learning preparation of evidence is by being inside the court, definitely in trial court, undoubtedly. Because you learn so much by watching in the court, how the judge comments. There are very good judges who participate, who throw a lot of inputs to you very naturally. The first point in preparation of evidence is, nowadays we find proof of it. Earlier it was not so. We used to prepare the evidence, which is the correct method. In our office, we used to always sit with the client, discuss with him, show him the documents. He may be an author of documents, he may not be an author of documents. So you give him a complete picture. Let me go with the claim statement and petitioner's evidence first. I have come across cases where the workman advocates have examined the workman without instructing him or without having a meeting with him. Yes, quite a few claim statements are prepared with extra fittings, which is not the version of the workman himself. Because the lawyer adds it. So let it be there, we can make use of it, which is not known to the workman. In one case, I still remember vividly, the workman was put into the box and the workman counsel asked few questions and then said, so when did I put it in Tamil, I எப்போ வேலையிட்டு நிறுத்தினாங்க, யார் நிறுத்தினாங்க? இல்லையே சார். திருப்பி கேட்கிறாரு, என்னைக்குப்பா வேலையை விட்டு நிறுத்தினாங்க? அவன் என்ன நிறுத்தலையே சார். Then the advocate said, Your Honor may dismiss the case. So you see what a gap in preparation of evidence. Therefore, you must prepare the evidence with the client's presence. Tell him this is your case. This is what I have pleaded. This is the case of the managements. This is the document we have prepared. This is the document filed by them. What do you say about that document? So now we have proof of it. So you narrate your case, and you also narrate your documents as a flow. For example, if you say this is my appointment order, it should be along with the drafting, so not in the end. As you just slipshod of preparing evidence is put the claim statement and add the list of documents and present it. That does not serve the purpose at all. As a narration, the document should come together. You say it's the appointment order, yes, this is the charge sheet, this is a transfer order, etc. This is a transfer of others, etc. You should narrate one by one as it is. Secondly, in the petitioner's evidence, you should deal with the management's case also. Don't leave it as a loophole or unrefuted. You should deal with the management's evidence, pleadings and documents, and you narrate the case. Similarly, in management's evidence, the fundamental point is never prepare evidence in the absence of a client. However big or however senior he may be, unless he meets you in your office, he sits with you and listens to you, don't ever prepare evidence of any management witness at all. It's so highly risky. Similarly, in the management evidence also, you put forth your case first, deal with petitioner's evidence, deal with petitioner's documents, why the document is not correct, explain the document, how it is not correct, explain your document, narrate it, and present it by proof of it in the court. Very importantly, we should strive to say only the truth in the claim, counter, evidence, documents, etc. We may win a case or we may lose a case, but ultimately we should keep up our professional etiquettes. There is no compromise on it, and no circumstance. From the first day till the last date of practice, you must ensure that you speak truth and nothing but truth in the court, and you plead only the truth. Even if the client tries to be smart, cut in ruthlessly and bring forth only the correct facts in evidence. Then the next sixth point is cross-examination. There is nothing more interesting in trial work than doing the cross-examination. But having said that, it is not so easy. For a moment, I'll deal with the chief examination also, one experience. The chief also should be correct, not in proof of it when you take chief in the court. I have come across very good labor court or tribunal judges who also later became high court judges. One particular judge, I don't remember his name, he was a very smart judge. He used to follow the case even as a claim case starts. Evidence, just go through the claim and listen to it very well. And he had a very sarcastic way of telling things. So when a lawyer was taking chief and chief was over, he told him, I quote, "நீங்க மட்டும் criminal law practice பண்ணீங்க, தூக்கு உறுதி இந்த கேஸ்ல." He said, என்ன சார் எவிடன்ஸ் எடுத்திருக்கீங்க, நிறைய பாயிண்ட் உங்களை அகைன்ஸ்டா நீங்களே வாங்கிட்டீங்களே, you don't know how to prepare chief examination. Then he said, there was a trial lawyer, criminal trial lawyer in Trichy. I don't know what is his name, some Reddy or something. Forgot. Virudhachalam Reddy. He said he will put maximum any big case, murder case or whatever, doctor, whatever, he has never put more than 10 questions in cross-examination. And in that, he will completely shatter the prosecution case. My senior is a class par and cross-examination. I learned from him. The golden rule in cross-examination is you should get only favorable answers. I said it, but it's very difficult. You should get only favorable answer in your favor. But how is it possible? Number one, you should sit with the client for preparation of cross-examination. You should get inputs from the client for cross-examination. Number two, you should be a thinking lawyer in cross-examination. You should think on your foot while cross-examining the witnesses. And therefore, the fundamental rule is get all favorable answers in cross-examination. I tell you one cross-examination, Justice Mr. Ashok Kumar was the level court judge. When my senior cross-examined the witness, about 10 questions, got all favorable answers. Ashok Kumar became restless. And he looked at the witness and said, "Appa, you are unga lawyer illappa, you are unga edir lawyer. Nee enna ipdi bayil solra?" He openly indicated it. Then my senior put some more questions, again got a favorable answer. Then Ashok Kumar said, "Mr. Gopalan, you don't continue the cross-examination today. Let's give him some respect." See, this is the strength of cross-examination. This is a sheer credibility to a trial lawyer, that you get all favorable answers in cross-examination, that you get by sheer hard work and deep thinking and on the foot smartness and thinking. For example, recently I learned quite a few. I'll say I am not taking pride of myself, just to share an experience. A case of VRS was put against us. So I cross-examined the witness. When did you, because the cases I coerced, management has coerced him to go under VRS. This is the only point. Then I said, when did you go to the office lastly? When was this compensation given? How many people were given, etc. Then, when did you get the leave encashment? After a few days, I came to the office and collected it. You were called over phone, yes. Then after a few days, you came again, collected your gratuity amount. And thereafter, a month or later, you came to the office and signed your PF papers, etc., etc. So this is how I took the cross-examination. The judge, after cross-examination, said, "Avladhan, case mundichi." Other side was furious. "What do you mean by?" He said, "Your case is coerced cross-examination. I mean, coerced resignation, VRS, etc." After 2 months, he has gone to the office periodically and collected it. And after only 6 months, he raised a plea of coercion. What remains in the case? Then the lawyer said, "Till you are there, I will not conduct this case. Because you prejudged your pugilist." Judge said, "It's okay, you don't conduct the case." I conducted the case before another judge, again I succeeded. Secondly, in another big VRS case, after the lawyer, petitioner's lawyer argued the case, I briefly narrated my version and simply read out extracted the relevant portions of cross-examination to the judge by arguments. Even as soon as I completed reading the cross-examination of Berkman witness in argument, judge said orders reserved. So he said this cross-examination is enough to dismiss the case. So in cross-examination, you can make out a case. Even if the pleadings are balanced, in cross-examination, you can simply tilt the case in your favor once and for all. See, as you all know, in trial court, it is the facts which ultimately decide. Law will step in only later. especially in labor matters, whatever may be the law, judges know how to overcome it. They can say, they will say in one sentence, that this case law is not relevant and be done with it. Or they will find out some way to get over the judgment which you gave in your favor. The facts are not there. So the facts are very relevant, and in trial there is nothing more important than cross-examination. Whatever shortcomings in your pleadings also you can come overcome in cross, because in labor law, pleadings is not so important. Still you can say evidence has come, therefore kindly listen to it irrespective of the pleadings. In spite of judgments, it say evidence without pleadings is not admissible, cannot be lived into. It's all a judgment-led law. What attracts a judge in trial court? Activity matters. So cross-examination is very relevant. And the misgivings in cross-examination is, which is not at all correct and not advisable, is that you must be aggressive in doing a cross-examination. You must bulldoze the witness, you should harass the witness, you should ill-treat him, you should shout at the witness. No. By that you will lose your focus actually. You should be very cool, composed and smart. That you should have the eye contact with the witness, and you should, I can say, you should lure him to you and make him follow you so closely that he will answer your questions in your favor. It's all time-tested techniques, and you will get it only by sheer experience or merely following the senior lawyer who is doing the cross-examination, or any other person, or listening to the judge. So cross-examination is virtually seal the fate of a case, is undoubtedly is true. Next is re-examination. Whether you should do a re-examination at all is, you should pose it to yourself first. Because there is no question of taking adjournment for re-examination. Some people may try to do, which you should oppose it. Because when you do a re-examination, you should be very sure that you and your clients are in the same wavelength. Because you want to clarify something, but if that question should elicit that answer, is the purpose of re-examination. I have come across a case where, due to one question in cross-examination by a very good lawyer, a trial lawyer in labor court, the answer was so suicidal. As soon as that answer was said, and I kindly record it immediately. The trial lawyer, other side lawyer, tried his best to not record it or put some more question to clarify it. I insisted, no, it must be recorded. It was recorded. Then the opposite lawyer said, "Your Honor, may pass orders." So the question in re-examination became so fatal to this case that it's a very costly mistake. So in re-examination, you should be very sure the question which because you are not told your client, this is what I'm going to ask and should be your answer. You take a risk, and your client should not go against you. So think twice before you put a re-examination question. Then 8 is argument. The best part or the toughest part during trial or original side practice is arguments. Argument before High Court is entirely different. Argument before the lower court is entirely different. What you argue for 1 or 2 hours in the trial court, you can do it in 15 minutes in the High Court, because facts are marshaled and everything is there. Because you only attack the award, but not in trial court. In trial court, the preparation of arguments is very, very important. You cannot come and argue thinking your memory will save you, or note down points here and there in the reverse side of the docket, etc., and argue the case. No, never do that. I have seen seasoned lawyers. The reason for their success is their meticulous preparation. Unless you are so intellect, so smart, that you can reload facts, etc., etc. Because in this profession, the success is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration is enough. So the perspiration, I have seen Mr. M.R. Narayan is a giant in labor law, whether he argued in a few trial cases or when he argues in the High Court or when I went with my senior to instruct him. Those days, cost list would come not in this sort of book form. It used to be in loose form, and you have to arrange the case wise, court wise. There will be blank sheets here and there. So many lawyers used to tear out the blank sheets and use it as a one side for preparing notes. So MRN used to prepare notes in the cost list blank sheets. The first will be that Pillar Suli. Then I have seen it is always GO. You used to write down the GO, which is for reference. Then the claim, counter, evidence, case law, and he used to go. He would not mind if he has to verify his paper. He used to meticulously follow his written notes and argue the case. Similarly, as my senior used to, even for a simple case, there will be definitely one sheet preparation. For a bigger case, it will be lengthy notes and preparation. Of late, he switched out even written arguments being dictated and kept it ready. I have also seen the senior counsels in Supreme Court. It's a very good learning experience when you instruct them. They also meticulously prepare note. I have seen P.P. Rao listening to a instructing counsel very carefully, and you will always have a junior counsel seated next to him with a laptop. And as he listens, he used to dictate to the junior counsel who will type it and give him the sheet next day morning in the court. Similarly, Mr. Rajiv Dhawan used to prepare a note. He had a very unique style. He had small files for each case. So, A4 sheet, it will contain even 10 pages, it will be a file. It will be a usually uniquely stitched file. So, you used to have written notes for that also. The argument, which I'll deal with it a bit later in advocacy, should completely narrate the facts of the petitioner's case and your case and what is the relevant documents first and how that connect the document with oral evidence should form part of it. Once you come out with the facts, which is your case, which is that should accept, then you deal with the law. Then you complete your arguments by concluding the proceedings. When I say this is the purpose of the arguments, this is how you should do it. Immediately, two fundamental, crucial principles follow. One is advocacy. What is this advocacy? In fact, I wanted to know what is advocacy in spite of being a lawyer for 40 years. I told my junior over phone, either give me some article on advocacy or some speech by some eminent lawyer on advocacy. Yamini sent me a number of videographs and some notes. And if you're interested, I'll send it to you also. A speech of Charan Das, someone, a senior lawyer in Bombay High Court. He is addressing the lawyers in Bombay Bar Association. And he narrates what is advocacy. Kindly listen to it. You can even pick it in YouTube. He has explained what is an advocacy. that runs about 30 minutes or so. You get that link from me or my junior and listen to it. But beyond, besides that, in simple, I don't want to spend so much time. In simple words, advocacy is nothing but making the judge listen to your case and most probably give a verdict in your favor. Because both of us narrate our facts. You should appeal to the judge that he accepts your facts. The argument should be so attractive, the judge should simply listen to you. His attention should not waver anywhere. He should listen to you. My senior argued, the best example I heard, my senior argued a case in Barry Bonds case, a famous pension case those days. A.K. Rajan was the judge. My senior started at 10:30, lunch, immediate lunch or up to 5. I argued entire day and concluded it. End of it, Mr. Rajan said, Mr. Gopalan, all these years, I never come across listening to such an interesting argument. One full day. And he said it's such an interesting argument. That should be the argument. That the judge should simply listen to you, and by listening to you, you should simply mesmerize him to agree to your case. That is nothing, that is all advocacy. But to achieve that, you must have solid preparation. I have spent hours in preparing cases, probably 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours, or entire day to present my case next day, which may take hardly about 45 minutes or less than 60 minutes. But that much time is necessary, definitely in trial court, to put across your case. Nothing but a full preparation on facts, complete facts. You can never err in facts, and you should never be found wanting to answer the judge on facts. You may err in law, or you may be found wanting in law. Even today I can be found wanting in law, but I should never be found wanting in facts at any stage, at trial court or high court. You must answer the facts without any hesitation and 100% correctly. If you say something, it should find a place on record, either in the document or in the claim, counter, or in evidence. It must find a place. And it should be always correct. So advocacy is nothing but a solid preparation of facts of the case with the legal provisions and principles to aid your case and present it to the judge to listen to him. The next important thing is court craft. Court craft is again something which you learn by sheer experience or watching in the court. Certain fundamental principles in court is you should be polite, first of all. You should be polite to the judge, to your opponent. Number 2, you should reply to the judge in all fairness. You cannot say something which is not true or not correct just to ensure that the judge is not doesn't go against it. You should give answers in a very fair manner. 3, be prepared to be surprised in a court. You may think I have prepared very well, but always be prepared. Because by sheer experience, judges in their wisdom pose inconvenient questions or very tough questions which you should be very ready to answer. And if you are not ready, you can always say, I think it over and answer. It is not necessary you must answer immediately, thinking if you don't know, you will be found embarrassing, etc. Therefore, you be ready to be surprised or shocked in any trial work or even court work. Then, when you present a judgment to the judge, give a copy to him, correctly highlighted, etc. But whenever you present a judgment to the judge, though you may know the judgment even earlier, but when you go to prepare it for an argument, you again go through the judgment from the very first line to the last line. That's very important. Because when you give a judgment to the judge, you should say the facts or interesting points of the judgment in a matter of 2 or 3 minutes. You must say, sir, Your Honor, the facts of this case are this, and this is what is decided. And that's why it is applicable to my case. And this is a para which is in my favor. I'll take you that paragraph. So this is how the judgment should be read to the judge so that it registers in his mind. I see some lawyers straight away taking to that paragraph and reading it. Judges also take it. But they may not appreciate the principles laid down in that. So when you give a judgment, you should be thorough on the facts and law dealt in the judgment, or what is already dealt in the judgment, the earlier judgments, what is that history, etc., etc. You must be knowing it. And the court craft also includes important principle or important standing, which I cherish very much. You should command the respect of the court. You should command the respect of the other side. You should earn the reputation that you are a fair lawyer. You may be dogmatic, you may be aggressive, you may be extra aggressive, whatever it is, whatever may be your style, that's all your inborn style or your knack of it. But you must you must get the respect of the court. The respect of the court is that you always say the correct law and correct facts to the best of your ability. In short, under no circumstances ever you should mislead the court. You will be caught if you are misleading the court. And if you mislead the court and you are definitely caught, you don't command the respect of the judge forever. So, whenever you come to the court, judge will be very cautious whether how much he can believe you. So, always command the respect of the court from the day one or till the end of your practice. The achievement which you get in the profession is not that you earn so much and you have won so many cases, you have so much of brief, etc. What is the respect you commanded in the profession is the certificate for you when you leave the practice. Because many a time I see even successful lawyers, judges don't take them seriously because they know this is the reputation of this lawyer, etc. You should never compromise on it. These are the points I have prepared for the today's subject, and I will share you 2 more points. Irrespective of the branch which you practice, I have learned this after quite a few years, so I didn't notice it earlier. You should have a fair idea about certain fundamental principles in other branches of law also. I'm learning it even today. Even last month I learned an important principle when I argued before a full bench on the issue of repugnancy between 2 enactments and certain about the provision in constitution which dealt with it. Justice Mr. Vijayan argued the point, repugnancy between central act and state act, etc. It was a very good learning experience. I learned the principles, what is in the repugnancy, what is in the reading down, etc. Uh, I also learned very recently when I argued a case, principle called casus omniscius, what does it mean, etc. So reading down casus omniscius, res judicata, estoppel, interpretation of statute. Though we all get away by saying in labor law the interpretation should be in favor of the workman, it is not so. Subsequently, the Supreme Court has clarified in sale case it is not necessary. You should not cause violence to the language and you should not go astray. So, interpretation of statute is a very important subject we should learn. Quite a few cases on labor law also come on that. So, interpretation of statute. Then some principles like what is meant by shall and what is meant by may. When become may becomes shall becomes may. Then principles of Evidence Act. Though we say in labor law Evidence Act is not allowed, we must have some knowledge or a basic knowledge on the principles of Evidence Act and common law principles. Right now you are known because of this COVID, an important legal issue called force majeure is being discussed. Immediately, I went through an important Supreme Court judgment on force majeure and tried to learn it. So, what is in the first force majeure? And very importantly, we should have a sound knowledge on history of law in which we are practicing. For example, labor jurisprudence. We must have some idea about the history of. For example, I read recently LIC versus Bahadur case. We all know what does it say. Special law versus common law, general law. What happens with the settlement after it is expired. But I wanted to read the judgment. So I started very first para. That was unique. Krishna here has given an explanation why it took 1 year to write this judgment. So it was very interesting to read that. So we must have some idea about the labor jurisprudence also and the history of it. For example, why 2J is still not notified. 82 or 84 and Amendment Act 46 of 82, a number of amendments were brought. They're all notified. Why 2J is not still notified? Why the matter is pending before the Supreme Court in 9 pages judgment reference? Why it is not notified? We should know a background for that also. So we must have a fair idea or history of the subject which we are practicing day in and day out. This is the 10 points which I want to say. To conclude, I want to say certain principles which are generally good for an advocate, which I learned, of course, from my senior. Number one, you should always be available to the client. Don't pretend to be a busy lawyer. Don't think if you pick up the call immediately, the client will think you are a free lawyer, you don't have much work. Or a client makes a call, you are really busy. Always remember to call him back. Answer to the client's calls, his doubts. Communicate to him promptly. Respect the client. You never have a right to fight with the client or try to show off you know a lot and he does not know anything. And you are his boss or his actual client is paymaster. We should respect the client first. Number two, very importantly, we should charge very fairly. Maybe some lawyers charge more, etc. We need not follow them, copy them. My senior used to say, if you want to earn more, you work more. That's how you earn more, not by charging more. So he said, finish more cases, bill, and you earn it. Number three, Be honest to the client. Never give him a false promise. In fact, I would say you should under-promise. It may appear that you are not confident, etc. But you can very politely and confidently say what is possible. And in that, you can even give a discount. And you can say only this much is possible, though something more is possible. Under-promise and deliver. Don't promise something which is not possible and fail. And even in courts, I have seen some people starting is very high flying, and after a few minutes they will come to the ground. Never do that sort of an argument. You start in a very fundamental way, in an even keel. I know how many of you listen to Mr. P.P. Raman's argument. An advocate of par excellence. His speed will be very even, and believe me, there will not be a single repetition. I have never seen a class like that, though I don't underestimate other lawyers whom I have listened, about whom I have got great respect. And always keep up the time with the client. Don't make him wait. He may be late, but you should never be late. If you're late, you must apologize. And finally, in the end of the day, in the profession, what you earn in money is not the criteria. What is the respect you earn when you leave the profession is most important. That I learned. We had a compulsory retirement sort of a thing, compulsory leave is 40 days. This is besides the point. I'm sure all of you would have made use of it. When I rang up, my senior rang up in between, I was wondering what he would have done because he does not have a stenographer now, because none would have come. He is not very familiar with, he is not a tech savvy. I thought probably he would be reading journals or doing Sudoku, etc. But he told me, Ravi, I'm very busy. Morning 3 hours or 4 hours I work, and evening 3-4 hours. I said, sir, what is that? And he said, lot of counters are ready to be made. I read all the papers. I prepared notes for each case. I dictated it over phone. So he said he's so busy. I was really stunned. What is that I am doing? Anyhow, we can make use of this period for good learning experience. Every day we listen to speeches, innumerable speeches. I really enjoy them. It was so much that I'm not able to listen then and there. I told my juniors kindly record it and periodically send it to me, or somebody has sent me a note which all the speeches are there, which you can press one by one and listen to it. I enjoyed listening to it, and I had a great knowledge acquisition on that. One more thing is this holiday. All of you relax, work, and do a lot of exercise, eat less, and watch a movie every night. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, before we wind up the session, sir, I'll out of time paucity, I'll open the floor for some advocates to raise few questions and doubts with them, so that sir, you can reply to them. Friends, on account of want of time, see, I can take 5 questions. Whoever is willing can raise your hands through the window, so that you'll be your line will be unmuted and you will be permitted to place the questions before with Mr. Ravindra. Okay. In fact, sir, I received a question in my personal chat from a friend who is also here in this group
Okay.
About the leading questions in cross-examination.
Yes. Yes, permissible. Not in chief, in cross.
In cross-examination.
Permissible.
Yes, sir. That's what she wanted to
Yes.
clarify it with you, sir.
Yes, yes. Then there's also
Anyone?
one us, no doubt.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anyone else willing to?
Okay.
You can also send your questions to this group so that we will be able to collate it and send it to Mr. Ravindran sir, and he will be readily available for us to share his answers in this platform itself.
Okay.
Sir, thank you, sir. In fact, it was an illuminating speech, and indeed it was a resourceful presentation, giving us the nitty-gritties of trial, which is the foundation for any lawyer in any field of practice. In fact, I had the pleasure of assisting you in the office for a long time, which I am indebted to my boss, Mr. Gopal. And sir, your work on domestic inquiry is a golden piece which we put to use on day-to-day basis, and it is an encyclopedia. I am sure, sir, all of us had a great time listening to a senior member of the bar, and we would request you to keep us enlightened with the various phases of labor laws in the coming days. Thank you for your valuable time, sir, and sharing the knowledge with us.
Arun, please.
Once again, thank you, sir.
Also, Arun, please call other lawyers for giving speech on this similar subject.
Yes, sir. We are having a session on day-to-day basis, and tomorrow Mr. Sai Prasad is addressing on DNS elements, and we have a schedule, sir. We are listing it out, and we are going to take it up on day-to-day basis, sir. And we will also keep you posted about it, sir, on a daily basis.
The recorded.
Yes, sir. It is recorded. It is recorded, sir. We'll send you the recorded. It is recorded.
No. Not only this. If I miss the others, I want to record it and listen later on.
Yes, sir. It is recorded. We are recording it on day-to-day basis.
Okay, on the top, I find it recorded.
Yes, right. We are recording it.
For all of you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Once again, thank you, sir, for your time and sharing your experience, rich experience. Thank you. Friends, we have a session tomorrow as well.